Joey Logano shows that he has speed this year by dominating and winning his second All-Star race. Kyle Busch and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. get into a huge fight, a brawl in the garage area after the race. Let's talk about everything that happened after tonight's All-Star race in North Wilkesboro. Hello everybody, welcome to Dirty Air. I'm your host Alex Lambert, and let's talk about everything that just took place after the North Wilkesboro All-Star race. Kyle Busch versus Ricky Stenhouse Jr. A huge fight, or a brawl essentially, in the garage area following this race. We'll analyze everything that happened there. We'll talk about Joey Logano, who led all but one lap tonight at North Wilkesboro. Dominating performance for that team that has really struggled this season. Are they on a hoist for a comeback after tonight? We'll break down everything that just took place after tonight's All-Star race, but we have to talk about the main storyline, and that's going to be right now Kyle Busch and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. going at it. I'll get into Joey Logano a little bit later. I don't want to overshadow what he did tonight, because what he did is a big story as well, especially if we're looking at points going into Charlotte, how Logano is currently below the grid. We'll break all that down as well, but I want to start out by talking about the fight between Kyle Busch and Ricky Stenhouse Jr., because that's certainly going to be the main storyline, a huge incident. So let's go ahead and just kind of break down the entire story. First off, it starts with Ricky Stenhouse Jr. This is on lap 2 of a 200-lap All-Star exhibition event. And Kyle Busch is on the high line, and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. obviously thinks there's an opening to make a third lane, but Ricky Stenhouse Jr. on the second lap thought there was room. Kyle Busch obviously thought otherwise, didn't think there was enough room. Kyle Busch obviously ends up hitting the wall fairly hard there. Luckily, didn't have a whole lot of damage, was able to continue, but still wasn't the fastest night for Kyle Busch, probably before that incident, and especially after the incident. And then, of course, Kyle Busch retaliates in the very next corner by getting into Ricky Stenhouse Jr. pretty heavily there. Stenhouse obviously overcorrects, slams into the outside wall. Kyle Busch essentially takes out Ricky Stenhouse Jr. after that incident, takes him completely out of the race. And then following that, you have Ricky Stenhouse Jr. decides to park it in the pit box of Kyle Busch, Kyle Busch's pit box. So the tow truck has to go tow it out of Kyle Busch's pit box. So a little bit of drama there. And it's reported that Ricky Stenhouse, he went up to the on top of the pit box and told Kyle Busch's pit crew that Kyle Busch needs to be ready, because I'm hanging out after the race, because North Wilkesboro does not have a tunnel anywhere to get out of the track. I know Martinsville doesn't have an area where you can take the cars or the haulers out of the racetrack, but there's a tunnel where you can walk through if you need to leave the event, enter the racetrack, leave. There's a tunnel you can walk through under the racetrack. I know Dover's the same way, but no tunnel at all for North Wilkesboro. So you're stuck inside that racetrack until that race is over if you're inside at the green flag. And Stenhouse was there to hang around all night. Kyle Busch obviously ultimately finishes in the 10th position. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Obviously was eliminated on lap 2 in this race, and this is when Ricky Stenhouse Jr. was sort of waiting around for him. He said in his his interview right after the wreck with Jamie Little that Richard Childress might need to hold my watch. So. And he stuck with that. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. stood with that. They had arguments on pit road. They were arguing on pit road following the race, having a discussion, and that's when Ricky Stenhouse Jr. obviously decided to throw the first punch, and then things just sort of got rowdy there. Unfortunate that we had all these pit crew members involved. I hate to see an argument like this with these two guys have this much attention, almost a brawl from the pit guys, but that's how it happens. The pit crew guys want to take their back. Stenhouse's team wants to have Stenhouse's back, their driver's back. Same thing with Kyle Busch's team. They want to have Kyle Busch's back. But just overall, this is something that's really boiling over. And this is a big storyline, because I think we're talking about two really important drivers, two veteran drivers now. Kyle Busch certainly way more popular than Ricky Stenhouse Jr. from a broad standpoint, more well-known. But Ricky Stenhouse Jr. is obviously very well-known as well. Won the Daytona 500 in 2023. He has a big name now as well. He's won a few races and is somewhat known around the NASCAR world, especially, and even outside the NASCAR world, just because he's been in this sport for so long and has gained the respect from many different competitors after, cleaning up his mess after the 2018 race, racing way more clean. A lot of drivers have started to get respect for Stenhouse, and you can tell that's not the case between Kyle Busch and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. This has been boiling over for years. Kyle Busch got wrecked by Ricky Stenhouse Jr. in Daytona in the July race, the summer race in 2018, and that has been a problem ever since. Ricky Stenhouse Jr., that was a really bad night for Ricky Stenhouse Jr. I remember he had to get a police escort after that race because there were so many wrecked race cars, essentially that was mostly his fault. So that was a bad night for Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Kyle Busch and Stenhouse have been going at it ever since. There was trash talk at Kentucky in 2018 following that. After Ricky Stenhouse Jr., this might be forgotten by some people, after Ricky Stenhouse Jr. won the 2023 Daytona 500, Kyle Busch was, said in his post-race interview, well, who lucked into the thing? He said, they told him Stenhouse. He said, oh, well, there you go. In a sense that Stenhouse sort of lucked into it because he's not that great of a driver. Those two have not liked each other for quite some time, and that's something boiling over. Even Stenhouse, a few things we can dissect. I mean, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. in his post-race interview even said that they've been racing hard even back in the Nationwide days when Kyle Busch would run the minor leagues or the Nationwide series at the time. Obviously now the Xfinity series, they would race each other really hard. That obviously carried over into the Cup series. Those two have had a lot of run-ins, and you can tell they don't like each other whatsoever. But I want to look at this from both sides because this is frustrating from both sides. Let's take a look at Ricky Stenhouse Jr. He's having a bad year compared to last year, right? I mean, last year, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. comes out of the gate on top of the world, wins the Daytona 500, biggest race of the year you can win, definitely changes his career. But I don't want that to overshadow how good of a year he had last year. If he did not win that Daytona 500, if you take out the win, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. would have still made the 16-driver playoffs because he finished top 16 in points and in regular season points. He was running very well that year, got a lot of top 10s, was contending for other race wins. We thought he might win, a few other races that season. I think he had a few second-place finishes throughout the summer portion last year. We have to go back and look at that. Had a solid year last year. This year, not off to a good start at all. Not in the top 20 in points, having a lot of rough days, having a lot of DNFs, more DNFs than a year ago. Rough season for Ricky Stenhouse Jr., so he's very frustrated. But when you look at Kyle Busch, he's exceptionally frustrated. After the fight, you hear Kyle Busch, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. said, hey, I'm going to wreck you in Charlotte. And Kyle Busch said, it doesn't even matter, essentially, because I suck just as bad as you. That's what came out of his mouth, which is unfortunate. Kyle Busch, a very drastic change from just a few years ago. Champion in 2019, left Joe Gibbs Racing following the 2022 season after that was a not so very, clean breakup. That was obviously some bad blood involved in that with him and Joe Gibbs. Kyle Busch's life changed drastically in the last 3 years as far as where he goes to race. And Kyle Busch just really upset. He's not having a good year. Kyle Busch's, I would say, worst year ever. I can check the numbers. I believe it would be his worst year ever. He's only 8 points in the playoffs right now. He's never missed the playoffs since they were implemented in 2014. Kyle Busch has gone winless so far this year. Kyle Busch has never had a winless season. He's gone this deep in the year without a win before, but he's never gotten an entire year without a win. In fact, if he does win this year, he'd be the first driver ever to reach 20 wins in a row. And just listening to the comments from Kyle Busch, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., there's so much frustration. Kyle Busch even said right before the fight in an interview with Bob Pockrass, I encourage you to go check that out on his Twitter page. He said he's tired of getting wrecked by everybody. And I think if you look at Kyle Busch, even not this race particularly, you go back to Richmond last year in the summer race, Kyle Busch has started to get sort of bounced around a lot by guys. Ryan Blaney's gotten into him a bunch. Ty Gibbs has gotten into him a couple of times from what I can see. Multiple other drivers, Chase Briscoe and Kyle Busch have certainly had their run-ins on the racetrack as well. And then, of course, Stenhouse and Busch. Busch is getting tired of getting run into and wrecked a couple of times or put into the wall. So Busch is frustrated. It's boiling over. Stenhouse is frustrated there. But anyway, there's a lot more to talk about after this race at North Wilkesboro. I want to mention Joey Logano. Let's not overshadow what Joey Logano did because Joey Logano has also had a very rough season, one of his worst starts to a year that I can remember since I've been watching. Currently, right now, he's actually 30 points below the cut line. He would miss the playoffs if it was to end right now. Luckily, we're only halfway through that season, but tonight does not count as a playoff race, but dominated, led all but one lap, and that was a lap that I think it was when Christopher Bell was able to get by him for just a fraction of a lap and crossed the finish line ahead of him. So a good battle there, but Joey Logano, this is big for him as well because I know it's just an all-star race, just an exhibition race, but when you show that speed that team needed, that when you show that speed by a team like that you can dominate a race, lead all but one lap at North Wilkesboro at a short track, a 200-lap race with the cautions coming out, holding everybody off on restarts, holding off guys like Denny Hamlin, championship 4 contender a year ago, Christopher Bell. Those are certainly big-name drivers. Very good for Joey Logano tonight. tonight. A huge confidence booster for that team moving forward. And confidence is very important in NASCAR, but we've seen overall how the Fords have really stepped up over the last couple of weeks. Chris Buescher obviously running very well last week, got caught up in some trouble at Darlington. Chris Buescher also the week before that super close to winning at Kansas. That was the closest finish in NASCAR history, right? And a Ford finally broke through last week with Brad Keselowski getting the win. But Ford's been running better. They were in the top 10 tonight. A lot of them were in the top 10 tonight. A lot of them were in the top 10 last week at Darlington. 5 of the top 10 last week at Darlington were in the top 5. Something certainly we didn't see to start out the season. They had to sort of step up. They have done so. It's a long season. We see this all the time. Seems like Ford has sort of been a little on the slower side since we went into the next-gen era at the start of every year and then picked it up at the end of the year. They've won the last 2 championships. Let's keep that in mind. And we talk about every year how they're not firing all cylinders. The Fords are slow, and they won the last 2 championships because they excel later on in the season. So I want to keep that in mind as well while we talk about Ford sort of picking things up. And you can even point to Joey Logano in that 2022 championship. Only got 3 wins that year, which is not a whole lot when you look at other championships. Once again, they were really fast at the plate tracks, Daytona, Atlanta. They were really fast, but once you got to the regular sort of racetracks that we go to more frequently, the short tracks, intermediates, Logano has really been suffering, and lucky for him that they found some speed. All the Fords have found some speed, which is certainly important. Let's take a quick look here at the top 10. Once again, no points on the line tonight. This is win or bust, essentially. Joey Logano, obviously your winner. Denny Hamlin was fast tonight as well, trying to run down Joey Logano. That was certainly fun to watch there in the closing laps of the race. Hamlin was trying to do everything he could, running a little bit of a higher line at the closing laps of this race, but really just didn't have anything for Joey Logano in the end to be able to get by him. You saw this racetrack sort of turn into a one-groove racetrack at the end at the top lane, which is interesting. And then, of course, Chris Buescher, another one of those Ford drivers, finishing third tonight. Kyle Larson, who actually started in the back because he missed practice and qualifying. Well, there wasn't qualifying, but he missed practice, so I believe he had to start in the rear because of that. I was able to come all the way up, finish in the 4th position while trying to run the Indy 500 as well next week. Qualified today, qualified 5th position. Ryan Blaney, solid top 5 night tonight, but once again, no points on the line. But it was a good day for Blaney. It looked like he tried to get up there and mix it up with his teammate Joey Logano, Denny Hamlin at one point of the night, but just never had the speed to quite get up there and get by him. Bubba Wallace, solid day, had to race his way in the Open. Bubba Wallace, I believe he raced his way in a year ago as well, but Bubba Wallace raced his way in tonight, got a solid 6th place finish, so there's certainly a good night for Wallace. Ross Chastain was able to finish in the top 7. Chase Elliott, solid 8th place finish. You had Michael McDowell, which, once again, he won a race a year ago, was in the All-Star race tonight. Very solid run for him. He's starting to show a little bit more speed as well. Another one of those Ford guys that has not had a great year either. A nice 9th place finish. And then, of course, Kyle Busch, who has had an awful season, but was able to salvage a top 10 tonight in North Wilkesboro. Once again, non-points event, but a very eventful night for Kyle Busch, but he was certainly not happy at all about finishing in the 10th position whatsoever. A few drivers actually tonight that we sort of thought were going to do a little bit better that did not was your Open race winner before the race started to get into the All-Star race. Ty Gibbs did win the Open. Unfortunately, he had some issues with Kyle Busch as well. They had a little bit of contact. Kyle Busch actually over the radio completely took the blame for that. I don't think there was any bad blood there. The exhibition race, Ty Gibbs has sort of learned how to keep his cool very well in the Cup Series, which is certainly admired. So I don't think we'll see anything moving forward there. And then, of course, you had William Byron. It looks like the toe link broke. I never saw where William Byron got into the wall before this or had issues before this, so certainly unfortunate there for William Byron that he actually got into the wall. The toe link broke. Massive damage for William Byron there. About midway through the race, unfortunately finished multiple laps down. I don't even know if he came across the finish line actually, but it was certainly 13 laps down when I looked at the pylon. Certainly took him completely out of contention for any sort of race win. But we do have the Coke 600 next week at Charlotte, the Coca-Cola 600, one of the crown jewel events, the second of 2024. It should be a big deal. It should be fun. 600 miles of chaos at Charlotte is what it's been the last couple of seasons. So we'll see what happens. We'll have to keep an eye on this Kyle Busch Stenhouse battle. We'll have to see if the Fords can continue to run well in a 600 miler next week at Charlotte. And of course, that's all there is to talk about following NASCAR in North Wilkesboro. And of course, about Kyle Busch getting in a fight in the garage area after the race. Let's get rowdy.